welcome to Dr. Amber Thornton's Know and Grow podcast, where you're never alone in navigating life's biggest moments and toughest lessons. Join me, Dr. Amber Thornton, clinical psychologist, mother of two, as I explore motherhood, parenting, relationships, career, mental health, and the ongoing journey of personal evolution. No, it doesn't stop. These conversations will absolutely make you laugh, may make you cry, will get you to reflect, but more importantly, you'll grow and we'll get to grow together. So I'm glad you're here and I hope that you'll come back. Tune in weekly for informative, thought-provoking, inspiring conversations right here with me. Hey, welcome to another episode of Dr. Amber's Know and Grow podcast. It's good to have you all back. I'm messing with my mic to get it to the right place. I've been playing around with like the mic and the video and all of that. And so hopefully you all are noticing that quality is improving a little bit, but bear with me because y'all, I'm just trying to do the best I can. And I know that y'all can relate to that. So it's so good to talk to you all again, to see you all again. Shout out to everyone who is listening on the podcast. Many of you have been listening for forever. But then also shout out to the people who are watching on YouTube, because I am putting a lot of effort and energy into my YouTube channel this year. And so I'm really excited to see how that grows. And so if anyone who is listening and you're realizing, oh, I want to watch, go ahead and switch over. It's fine. As long as you tune in, it doesn't matter. Okay, so let me take a sip of my tea really quickly. I am drinking green tea, and then I have a green tea bag in there, and then I also have one that's like turmeric and cinnamon. So put them together. But then also something I'm doing lately with my morning tea is I put a scoop of collagen in there as well. Not sure if it helps, but I'm just doing it because that's what everyone is doing nowadays. So one more sip and then we'll get started for today. It's very good. It's so soothing. All right, you all. So today's episode, I wanted to have a little bit of fun. And also, I know that most of you all's have been preoccupied with this thing that has been happening in our culture and online the last few weeks. I hope I'm not too late, but I just wanted to use today to go ahead and share my thoughts, my reflections, my insights on who the fuck did I marry? So I'm probably going to title this episode, Who the Fuck Did I Marry? Recap from a Clinical Psychologist, because I just felt like I need to talk about it. I recently finished the series. I watched it mostly on TikTok. And let me first tell you, for those of you who have been skeptical and have not wanted to watch, I was you. At first, when I first started to hear about it and hear that people were watching it, and I heard it was like a 50-part series on TikTok, I was like, absolutely not. Because first of all, I was like, I'm a psychologist. I can already kind of imagine how this series is going to play out. Like I probably could write the story for you that she's going to tell. So I felt like, okay, I probably already know how crazy this is going to get. But then I was also like, 50 parts, that's a lot. I don't know if I want to put that much time into it. But of course, like anything online that's going viral or trending, started to feel a little FOMO. And I was like, you know what, let me just check it out because people are talking about it. I want to have fun too. So I decided to tune in. And you all, let me tell you, I actually have no regrets. No regrets at all. I thoroughly enjoyed it for a few reasons. And I'll talk about those today. But I really enjoyed my experience with watching this series, which is, it's crazy. And now I get why so many of you tuned in and watched it. I loved it. First of all, Reesa is a very good storyteller. Like I've been telling people that, like, they ask like, well, what made you keep watching? Why were you so captivated? She's a really good storyteller. Like the way that she recalled details and the way that she pieced them together. Not everyone is good at recalling stories and recalling information in a way that feels like a narrative. And she did it perfectly. So every piece I felt like I was following. I was never lost. Everything was clear. And then by the end of each part, I wanted to know more. So I was captivated because she's such a great storyteller. But then also, I think I also was very drawn to, and many of you as well, to her honesty and her vulnerability. I think it started to feel like we were friends and I was listening to her share her experience, and I so that also made me lean in and tune in. I started to care for her in her life and wanted to see this through because I wanted to know, okay, did you get out of it and are you doing better? Like, I was very invested, and I appreciated how well she told that story, also realizing how hard it probably was for her to retell that. So I just want to share my thoughts with you all today. I have my notes here. If you see me looking at my iPad, I'm looking at it because I have a ton of notes. You see this on YouTube? Y'all see? I have a ton of notes that I want to talk through. So there's 4 points that I actually want to talk through that I think really stood out to me with regard to this story. But then I also have 5 questions that I want to answer because several of you knew that I was watching it. And so during that time, you all were asking me questions about my thoughts, my opinions, but then also from a psychological perspective, what was I thinking? And so I put together 5 questions that I was getting and that you all sent me about this. Okay, let's get into it. Let me take another sip of tea. So also, for those of you who are listening, if you hear me pause, I'm probably just drinking my tea because something else I'm working on is just drinking more water. I finally got up to about a gallon a day. I'm working on that. And so tea is very much part of it for me because I don't put any sugar or sweetener or anything in my tea. It's literally just hot water in a tea bag and my collagen. So I want to get my water in. One more. Okay, let's talk about these points. So the order of these points, not necessarily in an order of importance, but just things that kind of came to mind for me that I wanted to talk through. And again, if you all have reflections or responses to this, if you're on YouTube, very much let's talk in the comments. I want to know what you're feeling and how you were thinking. If you are listening on the podcast, feel free to head on over to YouTube and share your comments, or you can reach out to me on social media and we can talk there. Okay, so the first point I want to make and I want to talk through is just the impact of deception and betrayal. I cannot imagine, like, as myself personally, I could not imagine having experienced something so traumatic that involves so much deception and betrayal. And I'm just thinking about the impact of that. Me as a psychologist, I'm thinking, what happens when someone goes through that level of deception and betrayal? And so something I wrote down here, what happens when someone goes through an excessive amount of lying or deception? What is the emotional toll that is taken on that person? How could this trigger feelings of confusion, anger, or even self-doubt? It also raises questions about trust, discernment in relationships, and the potential for rebuilding trust after such experiences. I think that because I started to care for Reesa so much as I was watching this series, I became really concerned for her in terms of how does she rebound from this? How does she recover from this? What is the impact of all of this for her even after she's out of it? And she kind of spoke to it in one of the parts. She said that, I think it was part 50, where she was really just kind of reflecting over the whole experience and how hard it was for her. She said, people that were already in my life prior to Legion entering my life, I trust them. I fully trust them because they were already there. Anybody new that I meet, whether it's a friend or a potential romantic partner, I'm so sorry, but I don't trust you. And unfortunately, I think that's a very real and honest impact of what she's gone through. Her feeling of her sense of safety and trust in other people has been completely compromised. And I think for her, it is going to take a lot of intention and work and effort to feel like she's able to feel safe and trusting in a relationship again, whether it is a romantic partnership or a friendship. The impact of that level of deception and betrayal that she experienced absolutely interfered with her ability to build new relationships in the future and also to feel safe and trust in them. So that part really made me sad for her, especially after she spoke to that. It just was like, damn, this is, yes, he hasn't contacted her since. Yes, he's leaving her alone. Yes, she's divorced and she's seemingly out of the situation, but she's still wrestling through and struggling with the emotional and the mental effects of it, particularly when it comes to relationship building. Number 2, let's talk about processing trauma and trauma recovery. I'm gonna take another sip of tea. I think as a psychologist, the morbid concerns that I have for Reesa was how traumatized is she becoming because of this very traumatic experience? What is going to be the impact of this trauma for her? And what does trauma recovery look like? I even went so far as to think, would she have a diagnosis of PTSD following this? Let me just a disclaimer. Yes, I am a clinical psychologist, but I don't want you all to take what I say here and diagnose anybody in this series. I will be talking about speculations here, but I am not able to fully or formally diagnose anyone because I would need to do a diagnostic assessment, a psychological eval, and I don't even know these folks. So I'm literally just speculating based on information that I've got offline. And we can do that. But I just want to make sure you all are clear. I am not diagnosing anyone today. So again, going back to processing trauma and trauma recovery, could someone who went through what Reesa went through experience post-traumatic stress after? Absolutely. And even if it doesn't diagnostically rise to the level of post-traumatic stress, could they experience some other mental health challenge related to trauma? Absolutely. There are other trauma-related stress diagnoses in our DSM-5. The 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 book that many mental health professionals use to diagnose, and I would not be surprised if at this point Reesa meets criteria for at least one of them, if not a trauma related stress disorder, but an anxiety disorder. There might even be some other mood disorder related to depression she might be meeting criteria for. But just like in the first point, the impact of the deception and the betrayal, that is all trauma. It was very traumatic. And she even expressed that she is still struggling with the mental and emotional effects of this. So, some things I wrote down here. I wrote Reese's sharing of this story really highlights the importance of acknowledging and processing our personal experiences, even if they are painful. And I said that because when it comes to trauma recovery, for anybody who has ever been traumatized, and if you do ever receive any type of trauma intervention or trauma therapy, you know that a big part of that is telling your story, processing that event, whether you're doing it verbally through storytelling or whether you're doing it more somatically with your body. We really have to process what has happened to you. And in some way, I actually really appreciated Reesa telling this story because it was a form of trauma therapy for her. And she even said it too. She said that she needed to release the weight of this, the heaviness that she has been feeling of keeping this to herself. Yes, she wanted to help somebody through her story, but also the process of telling your story, even when it's painful, helps you to process your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions behind it, and that can help you heal. That is why it is so important to tell our stories, our painful stories, our traumatic stories, because that is a form of processing. And part of trauma recovery is processing the traumatic event. That is not to say that everyone who has been through a trauma should get on TikTok and share their story, because that might not be therapeutic for everybody. Many people need to do that in the safety of a therapy room or in the safety of a mental health professional. But for other people, they could be processing their trauma through journaling or telling their story online. And I think that's why it's so important for us to not judge her for what she did, because she was doing this to help other women who might be in a similar situation later, but she also was doing it as part of her trauma recovery. I'm sure she feels a little bit better after doing this. Uh-oh, y'all. I just deleted my notes. Hold on. Okay, I'm back. This was part of her recovery process. She eventually got to a point, because you all know this all happened in 2020 and 2021, and she finally felt ready to tell her story in 2024. This was a part of her process, and it is a process because it means that it took her a few years to feel ready to do this, but she finally felt ready to do this, and now it has helped her. Okay. So let's see, what else do I want to say about trauma recovery? Something else I wrote down is that this series likely sparked conversations around healthy coping, seeking support, and navigating and healing from trauma and recovery. And it absolutely did. I think for many people who have been in similar situations, or just people who are watching, they really started to think about, okay, what does healing from trauma look like? What might that journey be like? And it also, again, I so appreciate her being honest, because she helped us realize just because the trauma stops doesn't mean the effects of the trauma end. And I think that's where she's at. And I hope that she continues to work through that process, because, yeah, Legion may not be messing with her no more. Yes, she's divorced. Yes, she's in a safe space. But the effect, the emotional, the mental toll that it has taken has not ended for her. Okay, let's talk about the third point I wanted to remake. The third point I wanted to make, and it is about self-reflection and accountability. Let me take one more sip. Self-reflection and accountability. Another thing I so appreciated about Reesa this series is how reflective she was. I love reflection. I too am very self-reflective. I'm very self-aware. When I'm working with my therapy clients, encourage a lot of reflection. Many of our therapy sessions are really just us reflecting. Reflecting about a situation, a circumstance, an event, and really identifying, okay, well, what is the impact here? How did that make me feel? How do I feel about it now? What might I do different? What am I glad that I did? Like, the reflection process is so important. And Reesa was such an amazing reflector. I don't know if that's the right word, but I love how reflective she was and how open she was with sharing this reflection with us. I also appreciate how much accountability she took for this. Granted, Legion was a monster, y'all. Like, let's be real. Those of you who watch, y'all know he was a ooh, y'all about to have me cussing, which is fine because y'all know I cuss. But he was a straight up villain in this story. But at the same time, Reesa constantly reminded us that, hey, I'm going to share with you some things, even if they don't make me look good. I'm going to share this with you all the while knowing I made a mistake. I'm going to be honest and upfront about this, all the while I know that I could have done better. And now I know better. She was so reflective, and at the same time, this self-reflection included a great deal of self-accountability. Something I wrote down, yes, the narrative focuses a lot on the deceptions and the betrayal by Legion, but it also invites us as the watchers to really reflect on our own relationship dynamics. It encourages people to consider their vulnerability to similar situations, such as manipulation or maladaptive communication patterns or personal boundaries in relationships. Reesa's high capacity, ability, and willingness to be self-reflective and hold herself accountable in front of millions of people also allowed us to really self-reflect and then also start to hold ourselves accountable for, hey, what is going on in my life, in my relationships? What am I at risk of experiencing in these relationships? And where could I do something differently? Where could I make some changes? I honestly, I don't think that this series would have hit the same if she wasn't so accountable. Like, I could imagine a different version of this where she's just like only sharing the negative things, the terrible things that Legion did, but never really taking any accountability. I don't think it would have hit the same, but I think we all were so captivated and invested and continued because we saw how she was trying to grow and learn from this situation. Yes, 85% of it was him, but there was a 15% where she didn't pay attention to the red flags. She ignored the red flags. She didn't pay attention to her gut instincts telling her things. She ignored her gut. Her judgment was not always good. She acknowledged all of this. And so her ability to be reflective and take accountability for those things was super helpful. Okay. And then lastly, the last point I want to make before I get into some of these questions was just how powerful storytelling is. And then especially storytelling around community. This kind of reminds me of the other point I made about trauma recovery and how many times trauma recovery requires some sort of narrative or storytelling so that we can process the trauma, process the events that have happened to us. But this series, Who the Fuck Did I Marry? Peak storytelling and community experience. Like, look what can happen when you are open and vulnerable and honest about an experience you have had, when you share a story and do it in the amongst community. And I'm using the word community pretty loosely here because yes, I'm talking about social media, but it started to develop community around it, right? And yes, I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are super judgmental of her and saying negative things, but when I was looking at a lot of those comments, so many of them were so positive. So many of them were grateful for her for sharing her story because it helped them to reconsider a situation. Or so many of them were so encouraging of her, just hoping the best for her, wishing the best for her, sending prayers to her. She started to build community around this. And it's making me think about how sometimes many of us can be so hesitant to open up, to be vulnerable, to share our personal selves, share our personal experiences, be more authentic because we're so fearful about the negative consequences. But the way to connect with people, the way to build relationships, the way to really feel more intimately connected with others is to connect. It is to share yourself. It is to be seen. And Reesa's willingness to be seen through the power of her story, through the storytelling process, built community. It built community for people who weren't even looking for community, but it also built community for her. It built opportunities of community for her. So I really felt like it was important to make that note. Something that I wrote, Reesa's vulnerability really resonated with millions of people and helped to foster a sense of community and also offered validation for those who have experienced similar situations. Absolutely. Absolutely. She helped millions of people feel seen and heard through her story. And of course, it just makes you think about the impact of social media. And I think we know that many of us who are listening to this, and if you're watching this, you know the impact of social media because we're the millennial generation. We grew up with this. And so we see how impactful it can be. But this series just highlighted it immensely, how powerful it can be. Storytelling and community absolutely can be built online. Oh, wow. Wow. So you all let me know your thoughts about those points. I just felt like for me, after watching that 50-part series, yes, investing 8 hours of my time digesting and taking this in. And low-key, I felt a little sad when it was over. Like I was just like, oh no, come on, we need 10 more parts. But those were the main things that really stood out to me. And it was just, wow, amazing. Amazing. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about some questions because I know many of you all have some questions and I wrote a lot of them down. So we're going to talk through some of them. Let me take one more sip of tea. Okay, side note. This tea is so soothing because it's warm. but also the collagen makes it like not creamy, but like there's a little bit of like hint of creaminess that I'm appreciating. It's hard to explain. Honestly, it just hit me. It feels like there's milk in here. Like warm, I don't know. It's hard to explain. But this is the experience I'm having with this tea. It's really good. Okay, questions. I'm a little nervous about these questions, y'all. So I'm going to do my best to answer them. All the while, I want to remind you, yes, I am a clinical psychologist. However, I am just speculating. We are having fun here. I am not formally or officially diagnosing anyone. I'm just giving my thoughts and my opinions and my insights based on the same series that you watched, okay? Okay, question number 1. Why do you think Reesa fell for everything that happened in this relationship? Why do I think Reesa fell for all this, right? Because, and I think this is a valid question, because many of us, or many of you, many people that were watching this were thinking, girl, I wouldn't have got past this and this and this because I would have done such and this and that, right? So why is it that she was so vulnerable to so much deception and betrayal? I honestly don't have, I feel like I don't have an answer. You know, I think that would require a lot more evaluation and assessment on my part. Like if I were her psychologist, if I, as her psychologist, was working with her and I wanted to get to the bottom, or like, let's say she came into therapy with me and she asked, why did I fall for all of this? That would be an intention that we would set to work through and process and reflect through a number of sessions. I imagine it would take me at least 5 to 10 sessions to really get to the bottom of this for her. That would actually be really dope if I could do that with her. But some things that I suspect, you know, she many times kept saying how she just was hoping that it was finally her turn. And I want to go here with this question because I think this can illuminate a lot. Many times throughout this series, she just kept saying, I just wanted it to be my turn. I was just so hopeful that it was finally my turn. And what she meant by that was she wanted to be loved. She wanted to be desired. She wanted to be accepted. She wanted to feel cared for. She wanted those experiences of, you know, a partner doing the big things just for her, you know, because he loved her. She wanted it to be her turn. She likely experienced feeling as if she's watching other people have this experience and she's also wanting it too, which is so fair and so valid because all of us, whether you are, regardless of your gender identity, we want to be loved. We want to be cared for, you know, many of us in different ways, but this is something she wanted for her life. And I think that the thing that came up for me is that sometimes our desires can be so deep and we might be so fearful that we don't get to have them. It might impair our judgment in other circumstances, right? So it's possible, and I'm not saying this is definitively it, but it's possible that for Reesa, because her desire for partnership was so great, because her desire to be loved and cared for and to feel all those feelings and to finally be chosen or to have it be her turn, that desire was so deep and so great for her. It may have impaired her judgment when she felt like it was finally on its way. It's possible that because there was some pain or some grief around that desire, that it just impaired her judgment a bit about how careful she needed to be, or how intentional she needed to be, or how conscientious she needed to be about this circumstance because her desire was so great for it. So I think that's all I want to say to that, because I don't want to go into speculating anything about like her attachments or her trauma history, because again, if I were her psychologist, I would want to uncover more about her early childhood experiences. I would probably ask her about what those were like, what her early relationships were like, because sometimes when we find ourselves in situations like this, maybe early on we didn't have the best experiences with regard to attachment to our primary caregivers, or maybe there were some traumatic situations that interfered with bonding and attachment. So many things could have happened, but I don't know if that happened to Reesa. So I want to leave that question right there. I think that's the best response for that one. Okay. Number 2, do you think it was wrong or right for her to share so much personal information about Legion and other people? That's a fair question too. Do you think it was right or wrong for her to share so much personal information about Legion and others? I'll be honest, y'all, I'm neutral on this. I'm neutral because I feel like lately as I have aged, and honestly, even in my therapy practice too, as a psychologist, I often take a stance of neutrality, non-judgment. And so a lot of times when I'm, working as a psychologist, I'm often in a place where like there is no right or wrong. There may not be any right or wrong decisions. There's no right or wrong judgment. There is no right or wrong thing. Rather, there are options, there are alternatives, there are circumstances, there are choices and decisions you can make. And we just have to be very aware of the consequences that may follow. That's the stance I take on it. Like, I don't know if it was right or wrong for her to share so much information, but I think that she has to be ready and prepared for whatever outcomes or consequences that come. And so a lot of times when I'm working with my clients in therapy, I'm also talking with them about, is this right for you to do? Is this wrong for you to do? I don't know. But let's work through the pros and cons of the situations or the decisions. Let's work through the potential consequences of each one so you can decide which one aligns better with what I want for my life, or which decision or choice or situation aligns better with the goals I have for myself. I think that's a better way to approach things, because sometimes things are not right or wrong. Things are not just black and white. There's gray. It could be somewhere in the middle. And for Reesa, she just needed to be ready to accept whatever consequences came. And if she could be at peace with that, then hey, it's all good. So I think that's how I want to answer that too. I don't know if it was right or wrong, but I think at the end of the day, Reesa had to be ready to accept any outcome or consequence that comes with telling her story so publicly. And I think she was. I think she handled it all very gracefully, and she continues to do so. Okay, number 3. This one, y'all. This is a highly anticipated question because I got this question several times. What mental health diagnoses may have caused Legion to act the ways that he did? Again, I am not formally diagnosing nobody. I can't do it online, okay? I can't do it by watching a story and then boom, diagnosis, but I'm speculating here. We're just going to have fun with this. So in the series, so I'm going to actually talk through 5 different diagnoses that potentially people might be thinking about or that might come to mind when they think of this story. So in the story, I think in the later parts, like part 47, 48, something like that, Reesa learned from Legion's brother that Legion had been diagnosed with 2 different mental health disorders. And according to the brother, Legion was diagnosed with these disorders as a child. So red flags go off for me, but let's talk about it first and I'll explain to you why. So first it said bipolar disorder. So let me just read a little description really quickly and to describe bipolar disorder for anyone who is unfamiliar. Bipolar disorder is typically characterized by periods of depression and then abnormally elevated moods. So we might see periods of low mood, which might be characteristic of depression, but then we also see these very elevated moods. We often call those manic episodes or hypomanic episodes. Those are the episodes that are a little less severe. But typically bipolar disorder is a fluctuation in these moods. No, it's not like, oh, today she was this, tomorrow she was this. It's not that simple, you all. And that's why it's so important to talk to a licensed mental health professional about these things. But in general, my very quick explanation is it's a cycling between very low moods and then also very elevated moods, or periods of very elevated mood that can be very dysfunctional for your life. Is it possible that Legion could have had bipolar disorder? Quite possible, because sometimes what can happen is if someone is experiencing a manic episode, it can absolutely interfere with their decision making, their judgment. There's a lot more risk taking behaviors, and there's also a lot of grandiose thinking when a manic episode can be occurring. But something that makes me suspicious about this diagnosis for him is that it seems like these behaviors were pretty long standing and continue to occur for long periods of time. And typically with a manic episode, these episodes may last a few days to maybe a week at the most. And so if it were truly bipolar disorder for Legion, I think we would have seen a cycling for him where we would have seen him engaging in these really odd, bizarre behaviors, the thinking, all of the like pretending and all of that. Highly possible during a manic episode, but I think we would have seen him cycle a little bit more where he came back down and seemed more clear, more aware, right? Like we didn't really see that in the story. So I'm also suspicious because I don't believe that we can adequately diagnose bipolar disorder in children. That's not fair. And unfortunately, that happens to Black children, especially Black boys, far more than it needs to. I have seen so many Black boys receive diagnoses of bipolar disorder when they're teenagers. And a lot of times what it actually is anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I actually am questioning the diagnosis for him that he received as a child for bipolar disorder and thinking it probably was not correct. Schizophrenia is another one that's coming to mind for a lot of people. Did he have schizophrenia? And so I think, quick description for schizophrenia, characterized by recurring episodes of psychosis that often are correlated with a general misperception of reality. So perception of reality is just off. It is not on the same basis as other people. Commonly includes hallucinations, which is hearing things or seeing things, experiencing things that are not based in reality, but then also delusions, a lot of paranoia, a lot of disorganized thinking, social withdrawal, and flat affect. So what I will say about could Legion possibly have had schizophrenia? Maybe, I don't know, because I have not met him. I have not evaluated him, but I'm a little skeptical about the schizophrenia diagnosis because per her story, he was a lot more functional than I would believe someone with schizophrenia to be, right? Yes, he told a lot of lies. Yes, he was doing a lot of things that did not really actually happen and were not actually happening. But typically someone who does have schizophrenia, they are not always as able to be so highly functioning as it seems like Legion was capable of being, right? It does seem like for a while he did have a job. It does seem like he was able to keep a schedule going with his day to day. It does seem like for the most part he was able to care for himself when he had access to resources, right? He was able to hold a functioning conversation with people, right? So I'm skeptical. I actually don't know if that was a true diagnosis or is an accurate reflection of him. But again, maybe, I don't know. I also, again, super skeptical because typically we don't see schizophrenia develop until young adulthood. So maybe between 18 and 20 years old or 25 years old. It sounds like he received a diagnosis of schizophrenia as a teenager, and super, super skeptical about that. All right, let's talk about a third potential mental health diagnosis for Legion, dissociative identity disorder. This one may not be as familiar. It used to be referred to as multiple personality disorder. This is a condition that is extremely rare, but let me read a little bit of a snippet. It says dissociative identity disorder is characterized by the presence of at least two distinct and relatively enduring personality states. It can be accompanied by memory gaps that are severe and can't be explained by ordinary forgetfulness. The personality states alternatively show in the person's behavior and in their presentation, their thoughts, their mindset, all of that. So with this one, I actually haven't heard anyone online mention this as a possible diagnosis for Legion, but I just wanted to throw it in just because I felt like it could be something that someone might bring up. But what I will say actually against this one is that with this story that Reesa told about Legion, for the most part, he was one person. Yes, there were a lot of bizarre circumstances and a lot of pretending, a lot of deception, but I don't think per her story we can say that it was reflective of someone who was experiencing multiple personality states, enduring states, right? Like we didn't really get that with him. So actually for this one, I don't think that this is something that he would or potentially be diagnosed with to make this story make sense. All right, I want to talk about two more disorders, but what I will say is that these other two are personality disorders, which are a little bit more severe. When it comes to clinical diagnosis, and again, personality disorders are extremely rare. But I think sometimes in culture, in our society, we talk about personality disorders as if they are very common. And that's why, again, it is so important to talk about these things with a licensed mental health professional so that we actually have context for what we're talking about and we really understand what we're talking about. And again, today, the purposes of this is fun. I will continue to repeat that. We are having fun here. But I think it's important to talk about these two because I know that someone online is probably trying to diagnose Legion with one of these two. Let's talk about narcissistic personality disorder. I know that this is a very common one that people like to talk about online, and they often just will refer to it as like a narcissist, like, oh, he's a narcissist, or they have narcissism, right? And so what I will say is that like culturally the term narcissist or culturally the term narcissism is not the same thing as a clinical diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. Okay. So with narcissism or someone being a narcissist, when we talk about that, like culturally online, it could be reflective of someone who maybe tells a lot of lies, maybe someone who needs an excessive amount of admiration or a lot of feelings of self-importance, right? So much so that they completely dismiss other people and they elevate themselves often. There are a lot of people who do that in our society, but that doesn't necessarily rise to the level of a narcissistic personality disorder. Okay. So when we talk about a narcissistic personality disorder, when we talk about personality disorders, period, they are always characteristic of long-standing patterns, chronic patterns that impair the functioning of someone, right? They are associated with significant functional impairment, particularly in relationships or within someone's ability to care for themselves or to function at work, right? Long-standing patterns, not just, oh, when I was in relationship with this, he did it. Far more. Long-standing, enduring patterns of dysfunction. Okay, so narcissistic personality disorder specifically long patterns of exaggerated feelings of self-importance, an excessive need for admiration, diminished ability to empathize with other people, might be characteristic of a lot of, let's see, I'm trying to read my notes here to see which one is most important to say or to mention. Intense and intense and pervasive feelings of shame, worthlessness, low self-compassion, and a lot of self-loathing. So the funny thing about narcissistic personality disorder is those things I just said, that shame, worthlessness, low self-compassion, and self-loathing, that's really what's happening on the inside for these people. But on the outside, there's this perception or this portrayal of something completely opposite. But it's like, I have to present this way because deep down inside, I feel so terrible about myself. I feel so low. I feel so bad, right? So these people will go all out at all lengths to do the things that help give them some self-worth and some meaning through admiration. They are also hypersensitive to criticism and possess intense need for admiration. We said this already. Motivated to achieve their goal, status, improvement, and perfection, and ignore relationships or situations due to fear of incompetence, failure, worthlessness, inferiority, shame, humiliation, or losing control. Could this diagnosis potentially explain Legion? Yes. Yes. And I was so hesitant to say that. But the thing I think that fits here, and again, cannot clinically diagnose him until I meet him and have an opportunity to diagnose him, to do a diagnostic examination, psychological evaluation. And even with personality disorders, it's really hard to diagnose that in just one session. I would need multiple sessions with him. And I will also need accounts from people around him to fill in the gaps. But either way, could this explain it? Yeah, you all. And I think the thing for me is the long standing pattern, these long enduring patterns, right? Per his family's stories and per the history, per both of his ex-wives' accounts, it sounds like these are cycles and patterns that he have been exhibiting for a very long time, according to his family, since he was a child. And they have not let up. They have very much impact his ability to function in relationships and at work. And this other part where he went all out to great lengths to be perceived as competent, successful, important, went at great lengths to receive admiration. He made up stories. He talked on the phone by himself for 30 minutes. He lied about so many things because he wanted to appear one way when really deep down inside he felt another way. He wanted to appear successful, important. He wanted to be admired. And he did whatever he needed to do to get Reesa to feel this way about him. He went at all lengths, deception, betrayal, all of it, to get what he needed. And that's why when she said in one of her final parts, she was like, I realize now Legion never loved me. He never loved me. He didn't even like me. Facts. Because really, the whole experience with Reesa was about making himself feel good. It made himself feel good when he saw how excited she would get about the cars, how excited she would get about looking at the houses, how excited she got about the potential London trip. All of that made him feel good. It made him look good to say he was the VP of a department or his work phone, his work car, right? Showing off how much money he's got in the banks and the offshore accounts. All of that made him look good. It made him feel good. It made him admired by this woman when deep down inside, he probably feels so worthless, so much shame, so much self-loathing, so much just low. So he had to do whatever he needed to do to feel much better. And that could potentially be narcissistic personality disorder. Again, I want to say this one more time, and other psychologists online say this constantly to you all. Narcissistic personality disorder is not something that all of your exes have. It's just not, okay? Many of your exes probably have a lot of maladaptive coping skills and not great attachments. However, that is not the same thing as a narcissistic personality disorder. But what Reesa experienced could definitely rise to the level of this man might have had a narcissistic personality disorder. Ooh, child. All right, last one we're going to talk about before I get up out of here. This other one I wanted to throw in potentially, just in case, and it is antisocial personality disorder. Let's see. Did I pull up a tab for this one? Antisocial personality disorder. Again, remember, it's a personality disorder. So it's a long-standing, enduring patterns that you might see in this person that significantly impair their functioning. And with personality disorders, we're often seeing that impairment be in their relationships, in their ability to show up in the world, right? So for antisocial personality disorder, sometimes this is called being a sociopath, a mental health condition in which a person consistently shows no regard for right or wrong and ignores the rights and the feelings of other people. These people tend to purposely make others angry or upset, manipulate or treat others harshly or cruelly or indifferent. They lack remorse and do not regret their behaviors. People with antisocial personality disorder often violate laws, become criminals. They may lie, they may become violent, impulsive. They may have substance use issues. So with this one, the key here with antisocial personality disorder is always that lack of remorse and that lack of empathy. When we as people lack remorse and lack empathy, it can make for a very dangerous person, right? And again, this is not your ex who didn't care that he hurt your feelings. This is not your ex who didn't care how you felt after the breakup. This is not even your ex who didn't really consider you when he cheated on you. This is not the same. Rather, when I think of antisocial personality disorder, I think of Jeffrey Dahmer. I think of any other serial killer that you may know about in our society. I think of serial rapists, individuals like that who are able to commit very violent acts and not be bothered, right? So for this one, I'm a little hesitant or questioning whether he might meet criteria for anti-personality disorder. And I think it's because, for me, when Reesa was telling the story, I didn't get the sense that his actions and behaviors really reflected a lack of remorse, but more so was better reflective of some of the things we saw with narcissistic personality disorder, where this intense need to present well versus the lack of remorse or empathy, right? When I think of antisocial personality disorder, at the core, I think of a lack of empathy that is driving the disorder. But when I think of narcissistic personality disorder, I think of an immense need to cover up shame and self-loathing as what's driving the personality disorder. And when I think of Legion and how she talked about him, for me, it feels like at the core, it was him needing to present well, to be admired, to appear successful, that was driving a lot of his decisions and the moves he was making. Ooh, that was interesting, right? It was fascinating. Okay, two more and then I have to go. This other question, what are your thoughts on Reese's pregnancy loss and any perinatal mental health challenges she may have experienced? So what I will say is that in general, I just, oh gosh, this part was heartbreaking, but also so relieving. And we hate to say that, but I think everyone who watched this series can relate to that. Like, could you imagine if she had his child? Could you imagine? Like, someone else also asked me another question, so I'll couple it with this, is what would have been the outcome if she did have his baby? The outcome would have been that she would have continued to have to go through this experience with Legion because she would be permanently tied to him, right? And then, granted, on the other hand, she could make a decision if she were to have his child to completely cut ties, but then there's always going to be that guilt in that the what ifs about how does this decision impact my child, right? Having to make the decision to cut off a child from their parent because of the parent's reckless life or bad decisions or because they can't get it together. Sometimes you do have to do that, but then you're also left with that guilt and the negative feelings that are associated with having to make that decision. But I think for me, I would have been so worried for her and the child if she would have had Legion's child. So I think a lot of us, again, very hard to admit this, but we kind of breathed a sigh of relief because we just couldn't imagine a baby being brought into this. I couldn't imagine. But with her having experienced a pregnancy loss, I was very concerned for her because she was already going through such a traumatic situation with regard to this relationship. So it really didn't feel like there was any room at all to cope with the loss she's experienced. And even in the story, it was kind of glossed over, and probably because it had to be, because her mindset, her focus was completely preoccupied and filled with all of the betrayal and the deception and the lies and trying to piece together all of the clues for what and who she married, right? So I imagine that now in her trauma recovery process, she's probably also trying to deal with the grief and the loss she's experiencing regarding that pregnancy loss. Like, I just don't even think there was a possibility for space to be made for that for her when everything was going on. So I hate that for her, and I hope that she is getting the treatment that she needs. Okay, last question. How important is it for women to fact check when they're dating men? Okay. I sat with this question for a while because my gut reaction is if you feel like you have to be fact checking when you're dating someone, that's not the one you're supposed to be dating. It's just not, because just even the idea of fact checking when you're dating, whether they're a man or a woman or regardless of their gender identity, if you feel like you have to fact check details or information someone is giving you, that tells me that there is something being compromised when it comes to trust and vulnerability. And if you can't feel trust or safety or a level of vulnerability in relationships that you're in, that's not a solid relationship. That's not a healthy or a positive relationship. I don't think that women should be feeling like they have to fact check everything that someone tells them. That's not okay. So then I guess the other part of it is like, well, what do you do? How do you know? How do you know? This leads me to this conversation of red flags and intuition. And I think this is the perfect thing to end this episode on today, because I know this episode has gone a little bit longer, but it was worth it. In Reesa's story, she constantly said, I ignored the red flags. I saw it, but I didn't do anything about it. I didn't realize this was a red flag. And I think online, on the internet, there's a lot of conversation and also a lot of resources about what are potential red flags when you are engaging in a romantic relationship with someone. I think it's important for us to just be aware of that and to know what those red flags are, right? So if you don't feel safe, if you don't feel like you can trust this person, if you don't feel like you're being cared for, if you don't feel like you're being respected, these are also not the same as we disagree. this is not the same as there is conflict, right? It's very much different. And so we have to be aware of, what should I reasonably expect from someone when I am in a relationship with them, and be aware of those red flags. But then more importantly, right? So for instance, I'm thinking, well, what if somebody just truly doesn't know the red flags? Or sometimes we don't know if people are telling us the truth. Like, sometimes people do lie, and it does seem like it makes sense. That's when intuition is so important. And even for Reesa, she constantly said, I had this gut feeling that something was off. I had this gut feeling that, something wasn't right, and I ignored it. I truly believe that women particularly have a very deep connection to their intuition. I think many of us make our best decisions when we are connected to ourselves intuitively, when we can feel our feelings and are instinctually connected to that inner self that's trying to give you information. But sometimes we're disconnected. Sometimes we can't hear our inner selves. Sometimes we can't hear our intuition. Sometimes we have experienced so much trauma, we also don't trust our intuition. But I encourage you to do some work, whether it is in therapy, whether it is your own self-reflection or journaling, or just through the process of caring for yourself and loving yourself more. I want you to become reacquainted with your intuition, that internal self that is constantly trying to give you information about any situation that you're in. When we are connected to our intuition and our gut feelings, it will always tell you when some shit's going down. But the issue is that sometimes we get so disconnected from it, we cannot hear it. We cannot even recognize it when it's trying to talk to us, and we don't trust it. So I want to end on that note today. I really want us to really be thinking about intuition. Is our intuition trying to tell us something? I know many of you have had experiences where you're in a situation and there's something in you that's like, this isn't right, or something's not okay. That's your intuition talking, and then it's telling you, no, it's not okay. This is not for you. This person is not for you. This situation is not for you. We have to really start listening to that, even if it means we might be disappointed, right? Like for Reesa, she kept saying, I want it so badly for it to be my turn. So that means that listening to her intuition would have meant it's not her turn. And that's painful, and that's hard. And so we also have to commit to listening to our intuition, even if we know that the outcome of listening is going to be painful. Even if it means that listening to our intuition means that it's going to be a consequence that we don't like, or we're going to lose something or someone. We have to be okay with listening, because our intuition never steers us wrong. Our intuition wants the best for us. It's kind of like your inner child that just wants to look out for you and protect you, or a dear ancestor that's watching over you, trying to guide you. Think about your intuition in that way, and really just start to listen and to embrace with it. Okay, y'all, we're just gonna leave it on that note. I feel like that's a really powerful message to end on, especially when it talks about, or when it comes to this series, Who the Fuck Did I Marry? Thank you, Reesa Tisa, for bringing such a amazing body of work to our culture. I very much appreciate it, and I very much wish the best for you in your journey of trauma recovery and healing. And thank you all for anyone who listened today. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know your takeaways in the comments on YouTube. Leave a review on your favorite podcasting app. Share this with someone so that we can have more conversations just like this. Okay? See you later. Thank you so much for listening to Dr. Amber's Know and Grow podcast. I love that you're here. I love that we're learning together. We're growing together. We're navigating all these things together. We're really in this together. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave me a 5-star rating and review. That is so important, because it helps this podcast grow, and it also gives me some feedback on how it's landing for you. Please share this podcast with someone that you love or someone that you know. And don't forget to connect with me on social media at Dr. Amber Thornton. I'll talk to you soon.